The original Captain America comics were comics that were made before the time in which the US had entered the Second World War. It is no surprise that they were considered more radical pieces of fiction based on the cover alone of Captain America punching Hitler, while also having US munition works and other forms of US weaponry and military defenses being destroyed by the Nazis in the background. Ironically, these comics were made around 6 to 8 months before the time in which the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. During this comic run, it shows several adventures of Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes as they battle to stop the Nazis from interfering with U.S. defenses and military weaponry as a way to sabotage them from either entering the Second War or during the Second War. One of those stories happens to be about a figure that is well known amongst comic readers today called the Red Skull. In this story, the Red Skull is not actually a human being who has a red skull for an actual head, but instead it is a mask worn by the aircraft tycoon Maxon. Maxon planned in this story to not only sabotage the war aircrafts that the US had been using, but had also planned to kill certain high officers of the US Army, such as Major Croy and General Manner. In the story, he actually succeeds in killing Major Croy and General Manner, and he thinks he's killed Captain America, whereas Bucky comes in to save Captain America before he dies. It ends with Red Skull's mask being shattered by a punch from Captain America and Maxon committing suicide with a lethal poison that he had used on his first 2 victims. The story itself is a lot more scarier and darker in terms of how comics were written back in the day. As shown in this story, Maxon brutally terrifies his victims by scaring them with the mask and then injecting them with a lethal poison while choking them to death, all at the same time. Meanwhile, at the end of the comic, Cap seems more of a laid-back yet brutal, less merciful Captain America than the all-heroic, justice and American way type Cap that we know nowadays. With this story having Bucky trying to stop Maxon from committing suicide with his own serum. When Bucky goes to ask Cap why he didn't stop him, Cap simply responds with a cold, "I'm not talking, Bucky." He then reports in the suicide, and the US military and detectives and the police, they go to gather up the evidence and see what all the commotion is. However, this story would take a certain change, a more lighthearted approach after the events of Avengers number 4, in which Captain America is discovered to be frozen in solid ice by the Avengers after Namor had accidentally broken him out of his ice structure. After these events, the comic was then redone as Tales of Captain America, showcasing Cap telling the story more from his perspective, in which the violence and brutality of the Red Skull is downgraded to a simple sleeping gas as well as a quick knock on the head. The clay mask is also reduced to a regular rubber mask, which was easily pulled off to reveal that it was Maxon. Maxon then tries to make a daring escape instead of trying to commit suicide, and Bucky and Cap fail to capture him as he is covered by Nazis who rain fire on them to cover his escape. It comes as no surprise to me that comics back in the day, including ones like Superman and Captain America, were considered more violent and more brutal than what we had come to know and expect from those type of superheroes today. Comics change, writers change, and the ideas for these heroes manifest and grow over time. However, it is also interesting to see how Jack Kirby and Stan Lee decided to change this particular story after the events of the Avengers, in which the retelling goes about the same way, except the major difference is that Maxon never captures Captain America and nearly kills him in this story, and instead he and Bucky stop him from knocking out one of the victim's wives with the sleeper gas. The story then ends with Cap saying that they would hunt down Maxon and not stop until, with him saying he'll put him high on his list, Red Skull's got to be brought to justice. However, the interesting thing about this story in particular is that Jack Kirby and Stan Lee decided to go back and redo it as a sort of retelling after the Avengers had rescued Cap from the ice. The main critique I have for this type of change is not so much a critique on them stopping the violence or reducing the violence that was shown in the original, but asking the question on why they would do this. Well, the main reason could be that at this time, the comics code came into effect, in which if a long-running series wanted to continue its works, it had to do several things. It had to reduce the violence. It had to use less guns. It had to show no sex or nudity or anything like that. And in terms of Captain America, there wasn't really any nudity besides the scene of Cap taking his shirt off to get the serum injected into his body. However, there were mass amounts of violence, specifically from Maxon in this story. He was literally choking out his victim. So that could be one of the reasons why they reduced it. But I want to actually go into another type of story or critique in which Jack Kirby and Stan Lee reveal that the Red Skull was not actually Maxon. That Maxon was just using the Red Skull's identity so that no one knew it was him. This story in particular comes from the fantastic origins of the Red Skull in the Captain America and Bucky storyline, The Daring Days of World War II. In this story, Cap is being interrogated and brainwashed by the Red Skull. He is captured and unable to move. However, the interesting thing is that when the Red Skull appears in the story, he reveals to Captain America, and to the audience, that Maxon was never the Red Skull and that he is the true Red Skull. Cap apparently knew this by saying that Maxon was a horrible fighter and that the Red Skull gave him much more of a challenge whenever they fought. Interestingly enough, what I both like about this story in particular is it shows a level of cunningness and brutality that the original Red Skull from the story that we got had, that the new redacted version took away. My critique for these three comics and these three stories is more of a, commencement for Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. They were told that they were not allowed to have this type of violence and behavior by the Comic Code Authority, which ironically was made by Marvel themselves. However, so when they went to retell this story of the Red Skull, their work had to be greatly reduced. The fear and the trauma and the horror of the Red Skull was greatly reduced. So instead, they sneakily were able to push aside Maxon's character and just willingly shove him away to reveal that someone else was actually the Red Skull and use his character as the starting point to bring back this horrifying villain. And instead of getting caught and downgraded or halted by the Comic Code Authority, they actually surpassed it by leading into a tragic yet not brutal origin story, sort of explaining why the Red Skull is the way he is, why he is so violent, why he is so angry, why he is so feared by everyone else. Jack Kirby and Stan Lee managed to manipulate and maneuver around the comics code and retell and keep the same features of their Red Skull character simply by using a tragic story as their starting point. And that is something I believe to be impressive and unique. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day.